Today's webinar is the importance of brand authenticity in pharma with Alexandra Glas from Pfizer, Melissa Koufopoulos, I messed that up, and I did it fine earlier, with Merck, and Lori Holmes with Hawk Partners. Intellis has many year-round online resources accessible through the Member Resources tab at intellis.org. You can watch 50+ webinars like this, event recordings, and BHBIA partnership webinars from 2021 on demand on our virtual learning center. Our membership renewal is open now, so if you're not signed up, you can go to our homepage and check out a short video about what our plans are for in-person and online events this year. We have saved time for questions, so please submit them as they arise in the Q&A section, and the slides will be sent to you after the webinar. If you miss any portion or would like to recommend this webinar to a colleague, it will be available on demand in a couple of days, and you'll be getting an email from me with those links. Lori, I'll turn it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Heidi. And thanks everyone for being here with us today. We're pretty excited about the conversation that we're going to have. As Heidi said, I work for Hawk Partners. For those of you who don't know us, we are a strategic marketing and consulting firm. We help our clients answer a spectrum of questions typically related to branding and go-to-market strategy. But we're here today at really what we consider to be a critical moment for the pharma industry, because COVID has really changed the dialogue related to pharma, and you can really see consumer perceptions have been shifting since the start of the pandemic. The data from our Pharma Brand Authenticity Survey really does highlight how important it is for pharma companies to be establishing those authentic connections with consumers right now at this point in time. But the question really is kind of why pharma and brand authenticity? How did we even get here? So 2 years ago as a firm, we decided to embark on brand authenticity and understanding what really kind of drives consumers' feelings about brand authenticity, in what industries is brand authenticity most important, and really kind of what are the pillars that support brand authenticity. And we had this hypothesis going in that it was going to be really consumer-facing brands where and industries where brand authenticity was going to be most important. And while it's certainly important in those industries, one of the most interesting things that we found is that pharma rose to the top as an industry kind of where it is most important. And so we decided to take the opportunity this year to actually dive deeper into that and to do a pharma-specific brand authenticity index. So this year we surveyed over 1,800 consumers. We still asked about 14 different industries because we wanted to see kind of, has anything changed, right? Is pharma still rising to the top, or has there been some shift over the last year? We asked about 19 different pharmaceutical brands and ultimately found 4 pillars that really are creating those connections. And the survey came back and said, yes, pharma is still the industry that's rising to the top, with 88% of consumers saying it's important for a pharma brand to be authentic. So, now let's talk about what those pillars are that really do kind of determine pharma brands' authenticity. The first is brutally honest. So consumers want brands that are going to be honest all of the time, even when the news is bad, right? Consumers don't want to feel like things are being hidden from them. They don't want to feel like, oh gosh, there's bad news, but I'm not being told. They want that brutal honesty. The second is constantly consistent. When you think of pharma, not necessarily surprising that consistency is going to be important to consumers. They don't want to worry that kind of when they have medication, that kind of batch to batch might be different. But again, constantly consistent is kind of a key pillar here. The third is explicitly moral. So companies that have a moral compass that are really driving all of the kind of decisions and discussions that company is having really is linked to how authentic consumers are finding a brand. And the last is unapologetically transparent. So if you think about this day and age, if consumers want information, they can go online, they can find it, but they want to feel like that information is being given to them, that things aren't being hidden from them. And they really want to be able to feel that confidence. So again, being unapologetically transparent and making sure that information is out there, again, is key. So these are the 4 pillars that support and determine a pharma brand's authenticity kind of coming out of our survey, which again, it's not necessarily surprising. When you think about the questions on consumers' minds often when it comes to pharma. They want to know about the safety. They want to know about the efficacy of the products, because ultimately, these are products that they're putting into their body that are going to impact their health and wellness. And they want to feel like they're getting all of the information that they need, and that it's honest, and that it's truthful, and that it's complete. So, these were the 4 pillars that we found through the survey, again, that are going to support Pharma Brand Authenticity. So we found some additional insights, which we think are really interesting. But before we dive into them, one of the things that we think is so important to talk about when it comes to pharma, and is very different than a lot of industries, is that you have this kind of corporate brand authenticity and you have a product's brand authenticity. And as you all know, very often consumers don't even know who the corporate brand is linked to the products that they're taking. So it's a unique opportunity and challenge, obviously, for pharma to really ensure that brand authenticity is being looked at both the corporate and the product level. All of that said, while historically consumers don't always make those connections, we have seen a bit of a shift lately for a couple, we had hypothesized a couple of different reasons. The first is with the advent of even more kind of patient support programs and patient assistance programs. Those programs are often tied to the corporate brand. And so consumers are starting to make those linkages between the product brand and the corporate brand. Also, with COVID, we've seen some changes, right? If you think about the COVID vaccine, consumers don't even know what the brand is, right? They're saying the company name of the vaccine. They're not saying the brand name. So we have started to see this layering and how consumers are becoming more aware of those corporate brands and how they tie to some of the product brands. But again, this just highlights the importance of kind of each of those pieces, that they do need to layer together, that one of them kind of cannot sit on their own. So diving into kind of our 3 key insights. The first is we really did find that authenticity in pharma is more important today than it has been ever before. So 71% of the consumers said that it's more important since the pandemic for pharma brands to be authentic. This isn't necessarily surprising, right? So COVID has impacted the day-to-day lives of consumers. They're feeling incredibly vulnerable. And it's really provided the opportunity for pharma to showcase the benefits of the research and development in which pharma has always invested, but which consumers often hadn't felt the kind of immediate impact of. Whereas with the pandemic and with the vaccines and with the treatments that have become available, consumers have been able to see how that investment does directly benefit them, again, in a way that not all consumers have previously had the opportunity to. And because of that, you can see how the conversation around pharma has really shifted. If you think about kind of prior conversations related to pharma, you would often hear kind of frustrations and distrust about the industry, whereas we really do hear a different tone in those conversations today, because consumers have a newfound appreciation for kind of the innovation and the science, and truthfully, kind of the life-saving benefits of the products that the pharma industry is kind of spending their time developing. The next 2 insights are related to 2 key consumer groups where we found that it's even more important to highlight authenticity. So the first is really kind of connecting with younger consumers. 92% of Gen Z respondents say that it's important for pharma companies to be authentic, which is the highest of any of the age groups. And it's pretty interesting because for many reasons, obviously, it's not that Gen Z is the #1 target for the pharma industry today. That said, with COVID, this is really the first time Gen Z has been part of that broader pharma conversation, because obviously they too are kind of in this pandemic and getting vaccinated or dealing with those decisions in a way that maybe they haven't previously. So it's really been, it's an interesting point of time with Gen Z to think about how kind of, with these savvy and skeptical consumers, how can you do the groundwork and lay the foundation today for these consumers that will be the targets in the future, and just building that authentic connection. So as they become more of a target and consumer in pharma, that they already feel that authentic connection. The other group and our last insight that we want to kind of dive into is this opportunity for pharma to build trust with the BIPOC community. So 90% of non-white consumers agree it's important for pharma brand to be authentic, which is higher than it is for the white consumers. And here we are in Black History Month with this year's theme being Black health and wellness. And we know that race-based disparities have been true in healthcare throughout history, and it's been no different with COVID. Communities of color have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. And so I think right now is such an imperative time with the BIPOC community to take the opportunity to understand their perspective in order to start building that authentic connection with them, and understand their perspectives and their needs. So again, just wanted to highlight those two communities, again, the Gen Z and the BIPOC community, as being groups where this connection is even more important. Again, it's important across all consumers, but these were the two groups that really did kind of pop up where there is some additional emphasis and importance. So, that was kind of what we wanted to highlight to dive into our panel. But just again, right now is a really interesting moment when it comes to pharma. Pharma does have a unique opportunity to really communicate to consumers who they are, what they stand for, what they believe in, and then ultimately live up to that, to build those authentic connections with consumers that, we really have seen are important to consumers. So thank you all kind of for listening to that, the highlights from the Pharma Brand Authenticity Index. If you want to see the full report, it is available on our website. Feel free to go and download it. But now I'm thrilled to introduce our two panelists for today. Our first panelist is Alexandra Glas. Alexandra is currently responsible for delivering customer experience insights and strategies to drive growth across markets at Pfizer. She brings 10 plus years of track record in the pharmaceutical industry, working across various marketing and commercial roles, managing assets through various life cycle stages in innovative health and established business settings in country, regionally, and globally. We also have Melissa Koufopoulos. Currently, Melissa works in global oncology, focusing on one of Merck's new assets and the lung cancer business. With over 20 years of experience in the pharmaceutical industry, she has diverse experience across various commercial roles, spanning sales management, analytics, customer marketing, and brand marketing. While oncology has been her focus for the past 8 years, she has also worked on primary care, hospital, and specialty brands. So thank you, ladies, so much for taking the time today to be part of our panel. We're really excited about it. So just kind of the first question, some people might be skeptical as to why brand authenticity in pharma is important, because some might argue that really it comes down to the physicians, right? What are they prescribing to the consumers? So therefore, kind of this idea of brand authenticity in consumers isn't necessarily important. Melissa, what would you say to that argument?
Well, first, I think I would argue with the basis for that. Yeah, I mean, the survey said 88%, right, said that brands need to be authentic. I mean, 88% is a pretty high number. I think, and as you talked about, Lori, patients are becoming much more involved in their decisions and their healthcare choices, and putting a medicine in your body is serious business, right? So I do think that we can't underestimate the consumer or the patient. But my second point would be, why not be authentic, right? It kind of just feels right. I mean, I don't know what the audience thinks, right? That feels right. Would feel right to the internal team to try to really stay authentic to your brand. Your external stakeholders that are connected to the brand, it would feel right to them. And then, of course, the customers, both the healthcare provider and the patient. I mean, a lot of things that you do in business to be successful in business kind of match up, I think, to supporting the 4 pillars you talked about, right? So if you are areas you watch a leader, if you are a leader in your team, in order to make the team successful, you kind of align everybody on this clear vision or mission. Like, this is why we're here and this is our purpose. And the leader constantly reinforces it. Everybody kind of slowly aligns. You hire people that that are linked, that are feel passionate about this mission or vision, they unify, and then decisions and prioritization choices become a lot easier. If you do that also with the authentic brand, right? What we are as a brand, that will help her be authentic. It's the key to strong, good business results. But clearly from the survey, it's also a key to this positive experience and perception by the patients or the consumers. So I mean, I just, again, say, why not? Why not be authentic?
No, absolutely. I mean, I think it's interesting kind of how you kind of weave together it, benefits the consumer and also kind of the business goals, and how being authentic supports both of those. Alexandra, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I do understand that some people might be skeptical, yes, because, it feels a little bit authenticity pharma, right? I do understand where the skepticism comes from, maybe, from historical perspective, but, from our research also that we do on a regular basis in Pfizer, we clearly see a very different trend, right? Consumers, as Melissa was also saying, are actively searching for ways in which to proactively manage their own health, right? Which means that they feel increasingly empowered to participate in their own care journey. And so in addition, also, if you think about the focus on all the new science where care becomes even more complex and expensive treatments heighten customer experience expectations, right? So consumers want tools and not solutions, I would say, because they want to participate. They want to be in the whole journey with us together, with the doctor, with the whole healthcare environment. So therefore, in my opinion, brand authenticity in pharma becomes more and more important. So that's what I would add.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting how consumers are kind of playing a bigger role in their healthcare decisions today than ever before. I mean, and when you think about it, what would you say, Alexandra, is the kind of authentic story that pharma should be telling right now?
In my opinion, authenticity comes to life when we are talking with the consumers rather than talking to them, right? So to me, the authentic story of a pharma company therefore has to be tangible, accessible, relatable, and very much personal. So, and I think, in pharma, we are providing medications to consumers, which is about dealing with a very important and at the same time delicate products for our consumers. So therefore, honesty, integrity, and you mentioned that also in your report, right? In my opinion, fully agree to that. Those are the most important aspects that we need to take care of. So combining all what I just said, in my opinion, emotion becomes the protagonist in the authentic story that we should be telling to consumers. And emotional stories which can consistently focus on transparency, on honesty, on integrity, they can produce powerful results for the brands because we connect with the people through the values, hopefully common values, ideas, and then of course also lived experiences. So that's what I would, should be the authentic story of a pharma.
Yeah, I think that what you said about kind of having a dialogue with them instead of to them or at them is so true. But it's also something I know at my company we struggle with, right? Because you never know what could happen in those conversations, right? And we're highly regulated industry, and so it's a lot easier to just talk to or at somebody than to actually have the dialogue. It gets a little challenging based on, at least in my company, the regulations and how we have to be very careful about where the dialogue goes and stay adherent to our label and our policy and our principles. For an authentic story, I know when I joined Merck, I was really drawn to the statement that our founder, George Merck, said. He said, many people maybe heard the quote, like, we try never to forget that medicine is for the people, it's not for the profits, and the profits will follow if we remember that, and they'll never fail to appear if we remember that. And for me, that's was always such a great story. But I think it's not only about the story, it's about living it and being it and fulfilling that promise too. Because obviously it's a business, but the patients have to be the front of it, right? Helping patients' lives and figuring out how to do that, and staying as authentic as possible. It's hard every day. It's not because you don't want to be authentic. It's not your intention. It's certainly, I think, in our business, our intention. But sometimes perception can be a challenge, and you don't want to make a misstep. And that's what I was thinking about too when we were talking about the previous question is, you want to at least keep it neutral. You definitely don't want patients or consumers to think you're inauthentic, because it's huge distraction for you, even if it's the patients kind of depending on their physician. If they think a particular pharma company or pharma brand is inauthentic, that's going to be a real problem.
I mean, and you certainly see that sometimes in the news, right? When, companies, whether it's about pricing or what, you see those things bubble up and you see those conversations happen, and you can see consumers having those reactions to kind of that inauthenticity. Mm-hmm. But, Melissa, it's a really interesting point about how regulated you are and how do you have that conversation with the consumer. I mean, Alexandra, what do you think about that? Because I feel like I have this conversation with clients so regularly, just of how challenging. I joke that pharma is the industry where marketing is the hardest, because you have such a small box that you can kind of live within, right? It's not like you think of some consumers brands and they can say Coke makes you happy. In pharma, if you put too much of a smile on a patient's face in an ad, you might get pushback. So Alexandra, how do you have that conversation with the consumer, considering kind of the regulations that you're managing?
Yeah, I totally agree. It is a challenge, right? I don't want to say this is kind of like we're doing it in an easy way. Not at all. I think, we just, we need to learn on the go, and try out, new ways of how we can get more in a conversation with them. And, there are certainly different ways of how we're trying it out also at Pfizer. And I think it means that you need more time. You can't just, go out and talk with them and that's it, you get all the information. But, for example, we're doing a lot of co-creation together with patients. It's certainly, again, structured. I don't want to say, it has to be all approved before, all that happens before. But nevertheless, the more you do, you have more the chance to stay close to them and, kind of talk with them. Instead of just listening all the time. And I think that's what we're trying to do more and more. Again, it doesn't work all the time, and I must say, where I see it's a little bit easier. I'm not working directly with the brands or for the brands, but I'm working across the brands or above the brands, what we say often. So I think that makes it a little bit easier to really tackle topics that we're more allowed from a regulatory perspective to kind of have a bit more conversations here. So that's how we're trying to do it, but certainly it's a long way. And we need to be innovative in terms of how we find new ways in becoming more in a conversation with the patient or the consumers than just talking to them and just listening to them, right? So that's what I would give you as an answer here.
Yeah, and Alexandra, it's interesting, kind of one of the things you just talked about is kind of your role above the brands. Mm-hmm. What do you think about this challenge of kind of individual brands being seen as separate from corporate master brands? You guys both work at companies that have been at the forefront of treating COVID, right? How do the individual brands get to, layer in that corporate brand and quite honestly benefit from some of the positive feelings that consumers do have right now with some of the corporate brands?
Yeah, so I would say, certainly that COVID has had a very positive impact in terms of how we are perceived by the consumers, and can, has a positive impact on the reputation also on the individual brands, because, if you say, okay, this brand is actually from Pfizer, now people know about Pfizer. I would say, in the US, it's certainly again different, but ex-US, Pfizer is not always seen as the, pharma company that you would always talk about. I'm based in Switzerland. We have some big competitors here where you see a little bit of a different perspective, right? So I think that COVID has helped a lot here to really drive that reputation and look at the pharma company from a different perspective. And honestly, I think now we as pharma, as Pfizer, we need to take that opportunity. This is the best opportunity we have to kind of use that COVID springboard. I don't know if that's the right wording, but and integrate and start integrating that consistent and transparent communication that consumers are asking from us, throughout the end-to-end customer experience strategy, what we like to call, for the specific brands, or even for a brand portfolio. Are we already there? I would say no, we're not. I think, but we need to take that opportunity. And there's a lot happening within Pfizer. There's a lot of movement to really jump on that train and keep going. And I think, again, you need to try it out. I think it is also about that you have to have consistency. That's something that we see, and I don't know, Melissa, from your perspective, what we see at Pfizer, it's still, often you have, your strategy by a brand and by the other brand, but you don't really see the consistency, which also makes it difficult for consumers to really see a consistent experience starting from the top, from a corporate brand down to the portfolio on the brand level, right? So I think that's a challenge that I see as the biggest one right now from our perspective, and where we need to really be fast and actually use that good momentum and jump on the train and work towards helping also the brands to benefit from that reputation.
Yeah, you answered the question in the two areas I would exactly was thinking about focusing to is, I think if anybody has worked on a brand here, how many times have you experienced a family member saying, I'm taking X, which company is that from, right? I think it's been a real slow go about patients and consumers really linking, and even physicians linking the brand, the product brand to the company brand. And as a company, we always try to bring them together. And it's been a bit of a slow go, but right now reputation and authenticity is becoming increasingly important. So kind of really linking them together, taking advantage of opportunities when they present themselves to bring them together is helpful. And I think, Alexandra, sounds like you work on some of these programs, but those beyond the brand, beyond the pill or above the brand programs, where we're really trying to provide support to patients, whether it's support to get reimbursement or support with AE management or exercise programs or anything to help them with the disease they're fighting. I think that helps. But I know what you touched on last is something that's on my mind all the time, because I actually work directly on an oncology brand, and I'm working currently on one that's not approved and will be in a couple years. And so what I struggle with all the time is how much do I position, even think about trademark and all these logo, how much do I make it unique to my product? And be really uniquely differentiated versus how much do I want to leverage the equity of either my corporate brand or another big brand that will sit very closely to it, and kind of that fine balance of being kind of your own brand. But at least for me, I think it's so important for us to leverage the existing equity that we have within our companies. And so and there's just a fine balance and a constant struggle, a good one, about developing a brand, whether it's a strategy or the trademark or the logo or all the pieces of that brand, so that you're leveraging some of the brand equity, whether it's corporate or another brand. So it's that's why I started smiling as soon as you talked about, because it's something that almost, maybe, I don't know, maybe keeps me up at night, but.
Well, and Alexandra, you said something about brand from Pfizer. Do you see yourself starting to do more of that, where it is kind of almost that you're using the corporate brand as an endorser to some of the product brands? Or is it more just the kind of, at the bottom of the website, it would also say, how have you seen that shift happening as, in order to try to take advantage? I think, Alexandra, you called it the springboard. Have you seen those types of shifts as well?
I think it's in the middle of process, to be very honest. It's not that the shift is already here. I think, there's a lot of initiatives towards that end to really, bring more that corporate brand into, that the brand perspective. I think it also starts with, looking at, how shall I say, looking at brand, so differently formulated. So what we do, for example, is that we're saying, often you hear you have the oncologist, you have the rheumatologist from an HCP perspective, or the internist. They're very different from each other. Well, I believe they're not. There are very clear, personas or segments that you see within those, but across the therapeutic areas as well. The same, we have done also now for patients or for consumers to start understanding, where are the, I would say, the biggest segments in terms of that actually, are interested, for example, and trust a pharma company, to start understanding, where can we as a pharma company actually start discussion with the consumers and really interact with them, as much as possible as it is, right? So, and so I think, it's not that I would say it's already there and it's all there, but I think we start to initiate the way we approach things, and that needs time. I think, we need to all be clear, and there is, of course, a brand. That's where we make, in the end, our business within each market. That's totally clear. But we need to see it always from a consumer's perspective. And again, they don't really care if that brand comes from Pfizer or from Merck, they really want just have that right treatment, and they don't really care if it's called X or Z or whatever, right? They rather want to know, is that the right treatment for me or not? So I think we need to move away from there, because that's what the consumers want. How we get there, I think it's still a little bit further ahead. But I think, that's how I'm seeing it. It's not that I'm saying it's all there in our end.
No,
but,
for sure.
We see that, there are potential opportunities how we can move into that direction. And we just need to take that opportunity.
Sure. So we talked about, kind of coming out of the survey, that there were these 4 pillars that are the foundation of authenticity in pharma, right? We asked about a number of others, but these were the 4 that kind of bubbled up to the top. So brutally honest, constantly consistent, explicitly moral, and unapologetically transparent. I mean, you ladies have each talked about it a little bit, but tell me, kind of, when you hear those 4 pillars, does that resonate with you? Are there any of those that you say to yourself, that one doesn't feel as right, or I'm shocked that we didn't hear that this other thing might be kind of one of the pillars that would be important to consumers, and then how would you imagine bringing those to life in the work that you do?
Yeah, they feel right to me. As I internalized them and I looked them over, I thought, for me, constantly consistent is the closest to what I feel like I have control over, what I feel like we have control of in like traditional marketing. It's and for me, how I bring that to life, something that I do honestly struggle with is when you're internally working on these big aspirational positionings, and you're trying to be aspirational because you want people to get excited and motivated, but at the same time, it makes me a little uncomfortable, because I want to make sure that you build the brand strategy based on something that's authentic, right? You become too aspirational while it's fun and exciting and it gets the team going. It could be something that's not achievable. And I believe strongly, I'm in global marketing now, but I spent years in the US, but that strategy lives and dies with execution, right? You can come up with an incredible, like a really pretty strategy, but if it cannot be executed, it's no good. It's not a good strategy. And I think you have to be authentic with your brand strategy so that it can be executed. And that's the one that I feel like in kind of a traditional marketing role, in my roles, that I feel like is the one that I can kind of most connect to and bring it to life. I mean, you talked about it, Lori, is brutally honest. I think that just reinforces the importance of share news, bad news even, or be very forward about where your brands don't work and be willing to explain it. And this is maybe where I was talking about, it could actually be a detractor. if you don't do that. And it's not always the marketer's job to deliver that. Sometimes the news, potentially bad news, is coming out of your clinical team or your CEO, your senior leadership. But it's really important, I think, in marketing, for at least somebody on the team, maybe the leader of the marketing team, to have a strong connection across functions, across the enterprise, across your company, so that you handle situations, maybe if there's bad news, or making sure you're transparent about where the brand doesn't work, that you're all aligned in providing that information. So you may, as a marketer, I think sometimes you have a role there, but sometimes it's also about alignment and coordinating with the rest of the company. And then for explicitly moral or unapologetically transparent, like we talked about, these are kind of, at least I see, in Alexandra, it seems like has some expertise here, is like the beyond the brand, above the brand kind of type of work. And explicitly moral, to me, maybe goes back to how I answered the first question, is if you really get the team aligned to your mission or vision, they just live it, right? And that's how you bring it to life, is you kind of reinforce why we're here, whether it's treating diabetes or it's treating cancer. And the team, they decide on their own almost to go out into the community and help raise awareness for that particular disease, and just kind of do things even beyond their day job that align to the work. And for transparent, again, just maybe a little like brutally honest, that this sometimes, because this one to me highlighted the importance of going just beyond the typical features and benefits with consumers, but making sure they know about the clinical trials or the data, or if there's an issue with manufacturing, or, that type of information. Again, it's a little outside of marketing, but I think what you would think of traditional marketing, but I think it's so important in the marketing team that we champion that type of transparency with our colleagues that maybe are not within our function, maybe a clinical or a medical affairs colleagues, so that we can kind of make sure that there's that authentic brand perception. And again, it may be outside, but we can still champion it.
Sure. Alexandra, what about you?
Yeah, so I think I would completely agree with all these pillars. And, I was really glad when I saw the research results. I think it totally resonated with me. Also, putting myself into the shoes of a consumer, this is what I would expect as well in terms of brand authenticity in pharma, right? But frankly, again, I think the implementation piece is more challenging. I would agree with Melissa. I think the consistency is something that we can kind of handle and kind of steer and kind of like having control. And, we can become better every day in doing that. But I think, the honesty and the transparency, I think the first one, the fourth one, I was kind of struggling and felt a little bit overlapping at some point, at least to me. So I just take them now together in my explanation here. I felt, I think that is certainly what we have learned through COVID, that this is something that really consumers are expecting, and are expecting even more going forward. And I think also that we learned that, negative results or anything that, we often felt like we shouldn't talk about too loud about it, is now actually be seen as, you stay true to what you can deliver, but also if something goes wrong, okay, but it doesn't mean that it actually has a total impact on your reputation. I think we also need to get used to that, I would say, right? It hasn't been the case so far, or not often. And as Melissa was also saying correctly, I think it also starts often not mainly on a global level, but rather than in the market with the sales rep or the medical liaison to talk about those things. So I think it's also, to me, a lot around training, that you make them feel comfortable to talk about those aspects. And I think, at least from my understanding, we're not yet there. And I think there's a lot of, opportunity for us to really make use of that, because it's just a common thing. You can have a conversation again, if it's with the HCP often, but indirectly then also, of course, with the patients who can benefit from it. And I think also with all the social media and all of those channels that, people just want to hear about it. So I think the more proactive we are, the better. But again, there's a lot of regulatory aspects that we need to be aware of until that social media post is posted. It's not done within 5 minutes like you are doing it maybe in Apple or any other company. So I think that's probably where I see we have challenges in terms of, being fast, because I think fast is another area that I feel is extremely important in terms of honest and transparency. You always need to be fast. You can't come a month later with your information because it has been probably already shared somewhere. So I think that's another area that is challenging for us, especially in such a highly regulated industry. And then the moral piece, I think, again, I think you even mentioned in your study, Lori, with regards to the COVID, I think that's where the first time also some aspects of, the ethical or the humanitarian intent that appeared during the COVID time. I think that's a very interesting area that we need to be even more aware of. But I think that's even more challenging to really implement. But I think that's extremely interesting. So I really hope, that's something where we focus on even more in the future as Pfizer.
Yeah, for sure. And somebody had a question, which is pretty interesting. When you think about this idea of constantly consistent, right? It's like, okay, well, you want to be constantly consistent within your brand, but what about across brands of an organization? How have you seen that play out? Is it a challenge? Is there even a mechanism for that in your organizations?
I think it takes it's a lot of work. I'm a leader of a brand. I was talking about a new brand now, and I spend a significant amount of my day just trying to talk to my colleagues in other functions about, what's our message, what's our strategy, how are we going to approach this? And in some cases, again, because we're highly regulated, some of the people I'm talking to, I have to be very delicate about it because I'm not, as a commercial person, not supposed to influence them, right? On the medical side, and so it's a constant conversation to kind of see if we're on the same page. And I can't push them too hard because I'm not supposed to influence them. In many cases I don't, but it's just a lot of conversation to kind of get a sense, at least, that you're aligned. And it's, you sometimes find out you weren't, right? And that happens, and it's a full-time job within your brand. And then to think about being aligned across brands, geez, another huge challenge. I think it helps if you have a really strong leader and potentially your structure kind of ladders up to someone that is a strong leader and is providing kind of strong either pillars or principles about how we approach things. There are obviously many reasons not to be consistent, good reasons not to be consistent. But if you follow a nice set of principles, maybe set up by your leader, then it can certainly help create consistency where it makes sense. But it's really hard. And it like I said, it could be a full-time job in itself, just trying to talk to people and coordinate. And you still will maybe never be fully aligned or consistent, or you still will have trip ups.
Alexandra, what do you think?
Yeah, I think I fully agree. It is challenging, and even more in general, but it's even more across the brands. And I think what I have come across, and I wouldn't say it's across the globe. I'm just talking about on a regional level. You can say, in a country, but then on a regional level across brands. I think that's what I've seen. Interestingly, more in emerging regions where they are a little bit more hands-on, maybe even, and try things out. And I've seen some great ways of how they're approaching kind of like this consistency across the brands, and just in a simple way, enabling across the marketeers, across the markets, across the TAs, to, for example, develop content in a consistent way. And also then the regulatory process that is behind to approve all the content, again, from country to country, very different, right? How can we streamline that process? I mean, it starts really in the operational tactical things, right? It gets really challenging. So I think that's where I saw a lot of great kind of like ideas and examples. But it's hard to just take that and say, okay, now let's roll it out on a global level. Again, I think it's very different how you want to tackle that. So I would say, yeah, did I came across? Yes, I did definitely came across some issues. And I think it is that, first of all, and Melissa, you touched upon, I think there it really starts from the top. Do you want to do that? Is that something that the whole organization needs to, change the setup of how we're approaching it? I think that's where it starts. And of course, from the bottom up, people need to be open and have an open mindset to actually go that way. So, and then you need to have a smart strategy to do that. So I think that's that's a third piece that I would add here. But yeah, it is a challenge. But I think we can learn from maybe simple examples that have been done. So best practices often helps here, I think, to just get ideated and get started.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is interesting because Alexandra, I think, both of you work kind of in global areas. It's interesting because you're like, it's like, oh, where can you be consistent across countries, across regions? And then you're talking about across products. I mean, that's just, the matrix is somewhat intense there when you start to talk about it. But we've been talking about kind of consumers holistically, but, obviously 2 of our insights spoke to the fact that authenticity is even more important amongst the BIPOC community and Gen Z. And so when you think about those 2 groups of consumers, where do you see the opportunities to really enhance the authenticity with those specific groups of consumers?
Yeah, well, I think you have to start by not messing up. Right? Well, I mean, we just said before, like once you lose trust, it's just so hard to get back. And so if this group is already hesitant, being transparent, being brutally honest is so even more important to try to help them kind of overcome their hesitancy and kind of see you as authentic or trustworthy. And so sharing bad news is even more important for brands with this patient population, or being really upfront about where the drug might not work or what side effects are truly for them to watch out for, and make sure that you're really transparent. But I think even besides authenticity, and there's been a lot of discussion about this lately, is just really knowing your audience, making sure that when you communicate with them, you're aware of them and their background and how they think about things. And so you can talk with them, or maybe at least to them in a relevant way. And so looking at even just our marketing team and thinking about diversity on our marketing team, or when you do research, making sure you're really thinking critically about your respondents. Are they representing your patient population that you're trying to reach with this particular campaign or brand message? And so we really need to deeply understand the BIPOC community so that we can interact with them in a way that resonates.
Alexandra, how about you?
Yeah, I think I can just agree to what Melissa was saying. And I think, there are probably different ways. I think it really starts with understanding, first of all, the BIPOC community and really want to understand. I think that's where it starts, right? Not just say, okay, we just it's another population we integrate in our research and that's it. But it really is about, you will really want to truly understand. And I just can take one example, and I think where we have the opportunity to really build on. So, for example, we have pipeline that include treatments for diseases that are proportionately affecting Black people. So, but we need to dig deeper into what are the root causes. So, now we have initiatives going on that really, want to ensure the inclusivity of the underserved populations at the very beginning of our R&D process, and then every step along the way. So, going back to the authenticity, we need to make sure that we continuously communicate exactly these types of activities and show them, what the outcome is, what's working well, what's not working well, right? And I think that's, again, we need to find opportunities where we as you said, Melissa, correctly, right? You don't want to go too broad. You really want to be smart in where you communicate, because there is a hesitancy. So you don't want to make something even more wrong, right? So I think that's where we need to be really smart. But I think finding ways where they, where they can see the benefits from, but also the pharma company. I think we do have benefits, right, if we do it right. So I think that's probably what I would add to what Melissa was saying, just as finding those little opportunities where we can really bring that to life. I think that's extremely important. Not do too much, but rather be a little bit picky in what you want to focus on and do that right. So I think that's probably the biggest I don't know, advice to pharma and Pfizer and myself I would give.
So the final question before we open it up that I want to ask is, when you do look to the future and you think about the opportunities that pharma has to show its authenticity, what do you think that looks like for the industry in 5 years or 10 years or whatever it may be?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've talked a lot about some of these things is potentially the shift from all of this healthcare provider, payer, health system directed marketing to more true engagement with our consumers. But it's really hard, right? I think, Alexandra, if I say, I know I cringed when we talked about how do we have a conversation with them. It's a challenge. And so I think we're going to have to continue to press hard. I mean, one way I think we're pretty successful doing that, we should continue to push on, is patient support programs. I think a lot of them are, at least I can speak for my company, we put a lot of effort into those. And I think they don't always get utilized as much as we hoped, right? And so can we do that better? Maybe now is a perfect time because patients are a bit more engaged, a bit more in tune to the pharmaceutical companies. So it might be a good time to push a little harder on the patient support programs, try to do better on our own, but also try to increase awareness of them and enrollment in them. But it's certainly a time, and I don't have the solution, but like, how can we push more to participate in social media? You mentioned the Gen Z, and they're our future customers. They're a little bit of our customers now, but they'll very much so be in the future. So how do we meet them where they are to have a conversation with them? That's really hard right now, based on the regulations that we work under and trying to be appropriate and how we have those conversations. So how do we push harder there? I don't know, but it's something I'm sure many are thinking about, and I think we have to do better.
Yeah, I may can just say to add, I believe, looking into 5 to 10 years time, I think we're even more connected. Transparency probably is being requested even more from a consumer's perspective. So, my thought, if I look into the future, I do believe it's also that not pharma is, just looking in pharma, but there's a whole healthcare industry around us, right? And if we think about Googles and Amazons of the world, right, they're all stepping into this area. So I believe, looking into the future, I have a feeling to really bring this authenticity to life, probably partnerships becomes extremely important. How? I don't know. It's extremely difficult and challenging again, I would say, but probably an opportunity also for us, because I think that's where authenticity is being lived so much already. And I think, probably there are ways of how we can leverage and benefit from each other and really, deliver what consumers are expecting from us. At least in 10 years time, I would guess, yeah, it's even higher, right there. I want to see how your research comes out with the pillars then, but really interesting to look forward to. But I think that's what I would add, and what I would love to see. I think, but an area that is still a little bit uncovered, at least in my understanding. And I think there's certainly here and there that you start doing things, but really in a connected way, because also the whole healthcare process, the whole healthcare journey gets so complex. So how do you make sure that have this transparency and this whole honesty and all that being communicated on in a consistent way again, right? So it gets so complex. So I think you probably need to have collaboration here with probably partners that help us here. So that's maybe what I would add as a future outlook.
Yeah, and like you said, it'll be interesting to see kind of how that does evolve and what the survey findings say then. That's the end of our questions. So we'll open it up to questions from the audience. And I did see one that came in around this kind of idea of, what techniques do your brand engage in to apply a filter between what patients self-report that kind of represents authenticity? So we talked about those 4 pillars, right? Those are self-reported, and what actually translates to meaningful authenticity that will drive their behavior or changes in those behavior. Like, do you think that what they said are kind of those 4 pillars are most important? Do you think that those things will actually drive changes in behavior?
I think it's hard to say, right? And these aren't easy things to figure out. I like working with Lori in market research because she's so good at kind of like, I think you do when you're getting feedback or input, right? It's really trying to dig deeper about what's really happening. Is this really going to matter to you? And I don't have maybe a simple answer for the question, but it is about really deeply understanding the customer feedback or the patient's needs, so you can anchor to that versus what they say.
Absolutely. Alexandra, anything to add there?
Yeah, just maybe to add, I think that double click, I think, on those 4 pillars, and maybe some indications is there, but I think it's certainly important that we really double click a bit more on this to really understand, where are opportunities for our side to actually start working on with those pillars and really, bring them to life. I feel like, it's not there's a filter in terms of, it's kind of like summarized again, you can just to a certain point, you can find out something from research. So that's what Melissa was rightly saying, right? We need to go a bit deeper and deeper and deeper. And then all of a sudden you see something else that pops up and gives you an answer to that. So I think it's a great starting point. But again, probably the filter is still here with regards to what does that really mean in terms of behavior. But I think we will figure out by testing and learning on the go and do a lot of research and try to understand what we can do better the next time. So I'm a big fan of also testing things. Is this message the right one or this one? How do they react towards? I think that's where we have a lot of opportunities. I would say we still don't use it to the full, but I think that's an area we need to explore even more.
Awesome. And one other question that came up, and then we'll wrap things up. When you think about, all of this has been about consumers and brand authenticity, but a lot of the people who might be watching, and even in pharma in general, not everybody does do kind of direct to consumer. And it is really more about the healthcare system and payers and physicians and all of those things. So what are your thoughts on kind of what would be similar or what might be different when you think about it in that manner?
Yeah, obviously we talked today about getting right to the patient, but it's true. I think direct to patient or direct to consumer is actually more of a US phenomenon than anything else. If you go outside the US, most countries, the pharma companies don't do direct consumer, right? They don't do commercials or advertisements or patient education direct to the patient. So I think about, maybe the person asked the question, your business is maybe more like pharma ex-US. And I still think pharma is quite successful creating a patient experience outside the US, even though they're not going at them directly. Maybe it's a better one, actually, you never know. They're working through the physician to get information to the patient, or maybe the patient, they may not push information to the patient, but they create ways that the patient can pull it. And I think they probably work quite well with patient advocacy groups or in the media to drive awareness of disease and treatment options. So it may actually, I would argue that that's a really good way to still support authenticity and connect with your patients, without being so overt and direct to consumers. Alexandra, you might even have more experience with this than I do. I know you're based in Switzerland.
Yeah, so I would say, I think I just could add that to my perspective, it's equally important in the B2B because, again, if I talk about the HCP, the doctor, the patient that comes to the doctor's office, it's the same patient that we probably have in the US that actually has, direct information from a pharma company. But this patient in Europe, for example, or in Asia, will come with a very informed view because he's going on social media, he's talking to his peers in patient associations, blah, 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 right? So I think we have the same, probably the same setup, just that we're not allowed to, communicate directly. What I do see the challenge more is, in those countries where you can't go directly, you have to find ways that the HCP, for example, is educated on it as well. So often what we have seen in research is, they don't even see the benefit from patient services, for example, sometimes, although the consumers would like to see that. So I think it's an education piece where I feel, that's where, again, pharma is, asked to do something about it, right? So I think it's a great opportunity for us to really challenge maybe also our HCPs in this respect.
Well, I think that's the end of our questions. Ladies, thank you so much for your time and for your awesome insights. I really do kind of appreciate it, and I enjoyed having the conversation with you today. I will turn it over to Heidi to wrap us up.
Yes, thank you, ladies, for joining us today, and everyone out there in the audience. If you're interested in getting more involved by joining a committee or presenting your own webinar, or just want to give me feedback about other resources that are vital to your success in your career, you can reach out to me at heidi@entellus.org. And I hope you guys enjoy the rest of your day.